What's up, our squad? Hey, listen, hope you're having a great day. We've got some awesome things going on tonight. All of our high school students, you're all together in one our squad house, which is pretty cool. Our middle school students, we can't even combine you guys. Because there's so many of you and it's incredible and it's awesome. So here's what we've got tonight. Over the last couple weeks, I've been working through all of the questions that you have submitted, and we're starting a new thing called Asking for a Friend. You know what I'm saying? And we got tons of questions, so thank you so much. Now here's the reality. I'm not going to be able to hit every single question that was brought up, but here's what we can do. Over the next couple weeks, I'm going to start pulling them and kind of grouping them together by topic, and we're going to hit these. Tonight we're going to get started with our first group of questions that came through. So what was pretty cool was we had a ton of questions about one of the very foundational elements of what we're all about here at our squad, and that was the Bible. That's right, the old B-I-B-L-E, the Bible. And so that's where we're going to start, is we're going to start walking through some of the questions that you submitted when it comes to the Bible. Why was the Bible even written? That's a great question. First, when the Bible was written, God used people. And He used people just like you and just like me to create the very document that would explain the existence of God, who God is, and how He relates to us. The Bible also helps give you and I a purpose and a destiny. See, when you and I understand that there's a real purpose for our lives because there's a real creator, and we learn about this creator and his existence from the Bible, that gives you and I a very real reason to get up in the morning, a very real reason to go through life each day thinking of life as something bigger than just the monotony of here and now. All right, next question that we have here. How was the Bible written? Was it written by just normal dudes and their thought? Or was it written by God? What does it mean that the Bible is inspired? Okay, so that's a really great question, because, you know, like, if I was going to go try and write a Bible, this thing would be all jacked up and all screwed up, right? And I think if you probably tried to write it, it would be all jacked up and screwed up as well. So here's what we mean by the Bible is inspired by God. So the Bible was created in the mind of God, and then it was outbreathed. It was God used people to write down exactly what He wanted to say. And some people look at it and go, well, what if somebody just wanted to write whatever they wanted to write in the Bible, right? And how would that match up? Well, in Deuteronomy chapter 18, that God says He's going to give His word to the people, to the prophets, and if they choose their own words, they ain't gonna make it. God kept a really tight rein on those that were writing scripture, those that were speaking on behalf of God. All right, here's our next question. What's up with the books of the Bible? How do we know that there can't be any more? And how did the books we have now get in the Bible? Now, when it comes to the Bible and the books of the Bible, let's take the New Testament, for example. When the New Testament was put together, they put together the books that the churches were already using to teach. Remember I said earlier that God protected the Bible? Well, He was protecting these individual books that were being brought together for the teaching of people who were following Jesus, right? And so in the New Testament books, the churches at the earliest of times were using these books in a collective sense. And they used them together for so long. They used Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, all the way to Revelation. They used those books for so long. They got to the place where they realized that there was nothing else that God was going to say or do that needed to be written and added to it. There really wasn't one group of people that stood up and said, this book's in, this book's out, this book's good, this book's not. Okay? What happened was everybody was already using these. Churches all over the globe had taken these books and said, these are the books that were inspired by God. And so to make sure that nothing got added, they said, hey, listen, let's put some criteria in place just to give some definition of this. And the first one was this. The first one was it had to have apostolic origin. In other words, it needed to be written by somebody who had lived and seen Jesus, right? They needed to have that firsthand experience with who Jesus was. The second thing they wanted to make sure was the book already being used by the churches. And in fact, all of the books from Matthew to Revelation, all of the books from Genesis to Revelation were already being held together and being used by the church. And lastly, did the book teach sound doctrine? So when you look at all of the books of the Bible, here's the interesting thing. From Genesis to Revelation, they all meet up. They all match up. They all tell the same story. The books don't fight each other. The texts don't fight each other. When they realized that was all here, they closed it off. And that was enough. All right, so we got another question here, and this one was really good. It says this. It says, how would you respond to this argument? The Bible is not scientifically reliable. Now, this is a question I hear all the time, because the fact is that we live in a culture today where technology and science rules, and if you can't prove something by science, then it just must not be true. So the question being, how do you prove the Bible is true scientifically? And my answer to that is, you don't. That's right. You don't. You don't prove the Bible is what it is through science. You just don't. You don't prove the Bible is true through science the same way that I don't prove that George Washington was once the President of the United States through science. We believe that he was, but there's no way to scientifically prove that George Washington was the president. So let me break this down for you. Here's what the scientific method requires. That something is observable, it is what? Repeatable, and it's measurable. Observable, repeatable, and measurable. It has to be those three things. Now, if I was to go back and determine whether or not George Washington was the first president of the United States, I can't observe that because he gone. It's definitely not measurable or repeatable. Okay, I just can't. That's not possible. That's science. That's how you prove things through science. Well, I can't prove history through science. To prove something that is historical, something like the Bible, something like the fact that George Washington is president, you don't use the scientific method. What you use is the evidentiary method. The evidentiary method is something that we use all the time to prove something historical took place. You'll most often see it used in a courtroom. And in the evidentiary method, you're looking for three important things: internal consistency. The second thing you're looking for is corroboration. And the third thing you're looking for is reliability. So using the evidentiary method, let's look at the Bible. Do we have internal consistency? In other words, does the book or does this historical document validate itself throughout? Now, I want us to break this down. 66 books. 66 books written over a time period of 1,500 years. Okay, 66 books written over 1,500 years, written in three languages: Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, by 40 different people. Now, if you were going to write a book, you would not do it through 40 different people over a time span of 1,500 years in three different languages. Oh, and also on three different continents: Asia, Africa, and Europe. That's how this Bible was written. Why would you not write a book like that? Because the thing would be all jacked up. History has proven over and over again that this is an extraordinarily consistent book. From the beginning in Genesis to the end in Revelation, here's what it tells. The story of God to mankind in specific places with specific dates and times, traveling through history up to the coming of Jesus, the Messiah, to save the world. That's what this book says all the way through. It's extraordinarily consistent. All right, continuing on with our evidentiary method, the next question is, do we have corroboration? In other words, was there independent people, was there independent sources at the time that when this was being written that could verify that these things were true? We have other writings that aren't included in the Bible. Writings by people like Josephus and others that write about Jesus, that write about the events that are spoken of in the New Testament. But specifically, Paul, he wrote 1 Corinthians super close to the time when Jesus actually died and rose from the dead. Now, the reason that's important is that scholars believe that there was at least 300 eyewitnesses that were still alive and saw Jesus back from the dead when he wrote 1 Corinthians. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he specifically talks about Jesus dying and coming back from the dead. If Paul was lying and made that up, those 300 people would have said, hey, that didn't happen. Jesus didn't come back from the dead. But the fact was, they saw it, they corroborated it, and they were there. Now, if Paul or if somebody in history wants to write something that is a lie and that is not true, you have to wait a while after the event. So let's say, for example, that if Paul knew that Jesus didn't come back from the dead, but he wanted to lie about it and say that Jesus did come back, here's what you don't do. You don't write about it when there's still 300 people that saw him alive. You wait until all of those people are about dead, and then you begin to make up your lie. See, the fact that Paul came right out and said, hey, this is what happened, all of those people, those 300 people ever say, yep, you got it, and they were able to corroborate this story. The beautiful thing about the New Testament is it is a book that was written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of eyewitnesses. I want you to hear that again. The New Testament especially is written by eyewitnesses, people who saw these events firsthand. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These guys were disciples. They were followers. They saw it. So they were not only eyewitnesses, but they wrote it during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. They didn't wait till all these people kind of died off. They wrote it right there, and it was corroborated all the way through history. And even to today, we continue to find evidences of corroboration. Remember, if all of this was a lie, if all the stories of Jesus was a lie, none of these guys would have written it so closely to the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. There's actually something going on right now that's quite profound, and it calls for the evidentiary method today. A lot of people are going around today speaking of the fact that the Holocaust never happened. They're called Holocaust deniers. The reality is, you could have never made that statement in the 1950s. You certainly could have made it in the 1940s, the 1960s even, or the 1970s. Why? Because people who saw it, who lived through it, were still alive. But what's happened is that as we've gotten closer, and as the last group of people who lived through that time are dying off, you're beginning to hear what? That it was a lie, that it never really happened. Lies are beginning to be brought out. Why? Because there's not the corroboration that was there decades ago. And so that's when you start the lie. Corroboration validates the New Testament all the way through because it was written so closely to the actual event of Jesus and verified from that point. So far we have internal consistency, we have corroboration, and here's the next thing, historical reliability. Do we have reliability when it comes to this document? So just to kind of lay this out for you, we've already talked about the 1,500 years of 40 authors, they're all saying the same thing. Here's some understandings. When it comes to the New Testament, to the Bible, we have 6,000 ancient manuscripts or parts of manuscripts that we can actually get our hands on today. Okay? And these manuscripts are all saying the same thing. Okay? It's not like they're all different and one saying this thing and one saying that. They're all saying the same thing. 6,000 manuscripts. To put that into a perspective for you, when it comes to other historical documents, here's what we have. Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, an older historical manuscript. We only have 10 of those that we can actually put our hands on. Aristotle's Poetic, ancient manuscripts that we can actually put our hands on, 5. and then one that most of you studied in high school or will study in high school, Homer's Iliad. We actually have less than 4 of those ancient manuscripts that we can actually put our hands on today. So let's compare those. 6,000 manuscripts or parts of manuscripts of the Bible, less than 4 of Homer's Iliad. Okay, so when it comes to reliability, we have so much ancient text that we can go back to and look at. It's absolutely mind-blowing. It is the most historically reliable document we have on the earth today. So that's how you answer the question, is the Bible scientifically verifiable? You can just look at them and go, you don't even know what you're really asking there. Let me walk you through the evidentiary method. See, the Bible is an absolutely amazing piece of literature. It's a piece of literature that is incomparable. And that is why, when we go back to it, God has given it to us. He's protected it throughout time so that you and I can go back and you and I can live our lives based upon it. Listen, great questions this week. We're going to keep hitting them. We're going to talk about some interesting things next week as well. But I've given these notes that I've put together to your small group leader and some key passages of Scripture I've highlighted for you to read and to go through in your small group.